being here. It's just an honor. Hold it like this. Okay, thank you, thank you. I love it when my sisters tell me what to do. They keep me in line, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Just a couple of housekeeping before we get started. We do have an English to Spanish interpretation opportunity here, or for someone, so if someone does need English interpretation, please come to the registration desk and grab a headset, and we have real-time Spanish interpretation. Sister Linda is the person that you want to see for that. We'd like to thank Sebastian. Sebastian, do you want to raise your hand for giving us a round of applause for Sebastian for your work in creating access in the language so that we can all be understanding, even though we're speaking different languages in this room. And also, did everyone kind of get how to do Slido? We're going to be doing some Slido throughout the presentation. So just if you need a minute to kind of figure out how to do the QR code, or just go online and put in Slido. This Slido room is ours for the rest of the presentation. So we are doing a word cloud right now, but then as other screens come through, we'll be doing some polling within the audience and things. So we want to, I want to be sure that everyone gets a chance to vote, right? And that being said, I would like to just acknowledge that we have Brad Paff with us. Thank you, welcome. And Jill Bennings. And this is such an important aspect. Thank you so much for being in conversations that are really important to the people who you represent. So that being said, so what word comes to your mind when you hear immigration? We're seeing courage and bravery, hope, push and pull, ignorance, a new start, determination, heartbreak, fear, loss, confusion. There's a lot of different words, and there's a lot of different conversations around immigration and people who are in transition and on the move. And it's really difficult, quite frankly, to have a constructive conversation when you might be on one side or the other of the issue. And that doesn't help anyone, right? So what we really want to do is to move forward. We know that we have to at least be able to engage each other, to have an encounter with each other in which we can hear and then see if a way moves open. So part of the reason I'm here is because I am going to just share with you a little bit of the best practices that we use at the Kino Border Initiative, where I work, as Michael had said earlier. I am Sister Eileen McKenzie. I work at the Kino Border Initiative. I've been a Franciscan sister of Perpetual Adoration for 25 years. I can't even believe how long Thank you. My hair was a totally different color when I came here 25 years ago. So I'm grateful that my community, their mission at this stage is building bridges of encounter and trying to create opportunities where people who are in different regions can connect and can really understand the communion, really, that we believe that we all are as creatures on Mother Earth. So I am down at the Kino Border Initiative, and the vision of KBI is mission with dignity. And we do that in three major ways. One is that we offer direct humanitarian assistance to people who are coming to Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, and we offer holistic accompaniment as they're making their transition. We also offer opportunities for encounter with education and immersion and advocacy. And our third aspect is engaging political systems in both Mexico and the United States to move forward in just and workable migration policies. So we do this, and I'd like to just talk a little bit then about the overview of how our day is going to look. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get grounded in why we're here, why I'm here, why you're here, and why now. You know, this is a pretty full room on a Monday afternoon. Why are we all here? And it's important that we are here. So we're going to get grounded in that. I'm going to share a little bit of best practices for communicating around migration. And then we're going to hear stories about people on the move at various stages of their journey and people who have companioned them, okay? Because changing narratives is about listening to different stories and hearing stories that are different than the ones we tell ourselves. Then we'll have an opportunity for some other wisdom in the room to be shared, some questions. I'm not so sure about answers these days, but we'll at least bring it to the floor. We'll try and have a little conversation. And then there are some calls to action, some political action that we would just invite you to during this time. As we move, and then one of the most important things is after this, we're going to have a march to Mexcal. So I don't know if you've been to Mexico before, but we're going to have an awesome taco bar, so we just invite everyone to join us at Mexcal afterwards. Just a little note about the resources used for the information that I'm going to be sharing with you. They are interdisciplinary, they are evidence-based, and they come from many different sources. These sources are here, and there are some others that are named within the presentation. But I do want you to know that these are some of the practices that are being used by other institutions at the border that just recognize that the conversation needs to move in a different direction, and that these are some of the ways that we can do it. So just a little bit about our sources. So let's start getting grounded. Why am I here? Well, first of all, I left 110 degrees, so that's one reason, but it's not the prime reason. It's not the prime reason I'm here. Why this is important to me. One of the things I served before moving to the Nogales border. I served as the president of my congregation, and one of the things that we discerned in my presidency was that migration is a sign of the time. You know, we have something at our southern border, but this is all around the world. Never in the history of humanity that we are aware of have so many people been moving at such a rate, and so many really moving for reasons of violence, for reasons of climate crisis, for different reasons. So we're at this time where the whole world is changing, and in our community, we recognize this as a sign of the time. And I think it really popped on our screen when the surges started happening at our southern border, probably about 2017 or so. We started to say, what is happening? And you might remember, we would see on the evening news just these, thousands of people, coming up in these along these roads, and Tijuana, Mexico looked like it was a refugee camp, which I'm from California, and I thought, but we used to go there on the weekend, and all of a sudden, people are living there trying to come into the United States. What's happening? So that was on our radar. And then we heard Pope Francis, being a Catholic institution, we heard Pope Francis's strong call to advocacy for people who are in migration, that this is a defining issue for him in his leadership. And we paid attention to that. My congregation, the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, were actually founded to serve German immigrants. They were leaving Bavaria 175 years ago. German people were leaving Bavaria, and the founders of our congregation said, we want to go and accompany them. We want to teach their children. We want to be with the German immigrants that are going to the United States. And then after serving in leadership with my congregation, I had the opportunity to be down at the border in La Frontera, on both the Arizona side and the Sonora Mexican side, and just to be in that experience with Catholic Sisters Walking with Migrants. It's a program put out by Kino, that just kind of called me in a very strong way. So that's why I'm here today. Why is it important to us? So I think the question then comes, I shared a little bit, now you can share. Why are you here? Why are you here on a Monday afternoon? So if you'd like to take out your phone and do a little Slido, and we'll just get a sense in the room, why are you here today?
Interesting to hear.
How can I help? So just type it in and then hit the little send button. Solidarity, politics, further education. I don't believe in walls. Helping immigrants find jobs, establish connections, to learn how to change the narrative around migration. Education, solidarity, learning more, to get a better understanding, to connect with others, to build a more belonging La Crosse, to learn more, to learn more. A friend helped organize. Thank you for the truth there. I want to learn and understand new arrivals in my community and support them. Answers to naysayers. Okay, there we go. So there's a lot of learning, a lot of learning that is desired in our group. The need more information to change, improve student knowledge, to learn more about the challenges associated with migration, to support legal migration, to help support families I teach. I want to learn how to better talk to people who aren't supportive of migrants. Hopefully you'll be leaving today with some capacity to do this. To be part of a humane response to immigration. Oh my gosh, I love La Crosse. Right? I love La Crosse. This is beautiful. This is like the welcoming community that when someone maybe doesn't have a place to go and you're thinking, if there's no sponsor, then where can someone go? Can we say, hey, we think there are people in La Crosse that can help you, you know? So we're going to move on to this a little bit, and let's just move on into learning some other things. But let's be grounded in, again, why now? Why now? So we know why I'm here. We kind of have a sense of why we're all here. Why is now an important time? Well, I just got this from the Wall Street Journal on April 5th. At that point, the number one issue was immigration as we anticipated the campaigns. Right now, I would say it's still an issue, although now the candidates have become, the front issue. But immigration, the policies around immigration, that has been a huge issue for decades, and that's not going to go away. So how our legislators feel and know how we feel about this is really important at this time. What's another reason why now is important? There are a lot of narratives, there are a lot of stories about migration that's out there right now. And these are stories that don't portray people who are in transition as people, quite frankly. So we hear words like alien, we hear words like overcrowding. We hear a lot of words that I'm not even going to say, because they really don't even offer human dignity to the people who are on the journey. Okay, so that's really important because this is in the news, in the major narratives. This is the dominant narrative. This is what gets people clicking. This is why people switch the news. They want to see, you get that little rush. What are we not hearing? These are how people identify themselves at the Kino Border Initiative when they're staying with us for months as they're waiting for their process to be going through. They describe themselves as family, as cooks, as extraordinary, as elderly, as merchants, children, dads, moms, stylists, embroiderers. It's a much different narrative that doesn't get as much access in the media. So we feel like that's really important, that we start naming this alternative, this truthful narrative about who people are and what they bring to our communities. things that is really important about why now we need to change the narrative is because a negative narrative is the first step in cycles of dehumanization that become extremely violent. For example, if you can see in the reel over here, this is the dehumanization cycle, and this is something that's been developed over the years, but Dr. Carla McCullough from the Juanita Sims Doty Foundation works with the sisters in the area about how we can break dehumanization through our work with anti-racism. And it starts with a negative narrative, and then that starts to invite some dangerous actions, that the talk becomes a little bit of a walk. And then harmful internalized feelings about people who are being portrayed in a negative light, those start to be kind of enfleshed with disruptive external reactions, and then more negativity happens. So how does this happen? A real common way we see it, you're illegal. We see that a lot. We hear that, right? You're illegal. So if someone tells me I'm illegal, then I know that I'm probably going to be profiled by law enforcement, right? That's what we have law officers for, to enforce the law. So when I feel like I'm being profiled by law enforcement, and it is something that happens, we talk with our Border Patrol officers in Nogales, and they'll say we clearly racially profile. Then all of a sudden you start to internalize, well, not only do I not belong here if I'm not legal, but I'm not safe. So when you don't feel safe in an area, then you start to avoid situations that scrutinize documentation, because clearly being legal equals documentation. So you start to stay away from those areas. You don't want to be chased by, if you run a red light, you don't want to be chased by, a traffic officer. Nor do you want to go to a place where you need housing, where they're going to ask for specific documents. And the more documentation, the more that might be intimidating. You don't go to work areas. You don't go for employment where they're looking at very strict scrutiny about documentation. So we find jobs maybe, or we live in areas where we feel safer, Now, that might not be safe at all, because this is clearly a portion of our humanity. These are people who are being exploited left and right with poor living conditions and poor working conditions. But part of that is coming because they don't feel safe. And then what do we hear with people around? Well, they're taking all our jobs. They're taking the jobs. They're overcrowded. And this is my favorite, because I heard it even when I was growing up. If you don't have anything to hide, you wouldn't run from the law, okay? So do you see how that cycle kind of can move? And then it moves into, it just gets deeper, and it gets more intense, and the externalization of this becomes more violent. Two examples, I would say, more violent both in sporadic violence and systematic violence. So one would be, so I do live by the border, like I said, in the Sonoran Desert, and so there are desperate people taking desperate measures, and they are walking in between ports of entry for 4 days, if you've got really good guidance and you can make it to Tucson. Thousands have died in that desert. Thousands. We really don't hear about it here because it's not quite that newsworthy. But people are dying, and it seems sporadic, and it doesn't make the news, right? So we don't know about that. And then another way in which it becomes a little bit more systematic is that we still see families separated as a part of the way people who are migrating are being dealt with in their immigration process. Family separations are happening, and it is a policy that people are following. So now is the time. What can I do about that? What can I do? I can't do about anything about the border. Well, yeah, you know what? You can start talking differently, right? We can start being very intentional about how we speak in the way that we're portraying narratives of people who are in migration. And I would say this is kind of across the board, just being conscious of how we speak about others and with others, so that we don't get into that cycle of dehumanization. I'll just share with you a couple of things that, one thing that is said by Nora Kitely from the Kellogg Foundation, and the research they've done is on the dehumanization cycle. And this is a quote: "When they see you as animals, you tend to reply by seeing them as animals. When they see you as human, you tend to reply by seeing them as human." So we get to play the role of disrupting a dehumanizing cycle. Now, Dr. Carla McCullough says there are 3 assumptions in her work, and she does work in actually she works with health outcomes for the BIPOC community who are in this country and are part of the dehumanization cycle. So she does a lot of work, and she goes deep into the health outcomes of this. But she tells us, as we're trying to do our anti-racism work, number 1, people are open. You have to assume that people are open to understanding and learning. Now, I kind of think of my Uncle Joe, and I'm like, I'm not so sure about that. But actually, is it Uncle Joe, or is it the approach that I take with Uncle Joe? You know, Uncle Joe can understand a few things. So the assumption is that people are open to learning and understanding. The second thing that she's assuming is that every person's feelings are valid, even if they are not based in facts. Very rarely are we reacting emotionally to something that's very factual, right? Or our reactions are emotional. The facts, whether they're true or not, that's another story. But the feelings are valid. The feelings are absolutely valid, and we have to assume that. And the third thing she likes to say is there are some rubbish ideas about people, but not people who are rubbish. And that's an important thing for us to remember at all levels of the conversation. So I think that those 3 assumptions are really, really important. So let's just talk about some of the best practices then about disrupting this dehumanization cycle and trying to have some constructive conversations. Okay, so everyone get out your phones, because we're going to do a little poll here. The question is, which of the following are best practices for communicating about migration? Myth busting, telling stories, modeling learning, emphasizing the humanitarian crisis, or lifting up shared values? Okay, so now we get to vote. Well, telling stories took a strong first. Give this a minute.
Am I talking too fast?
And you can pick more than one. I forgot to put that in there. You can pick more than one. Okay. So it looks like clearly telling stories is in the lead in this group, followed by lifting up shared values. Myth busting is a strong, well, it's a relatively strong third, and it is kind of tied with modeling learning, and then emphasizing the humanitarian crisis. So 3 of these are considered best practices. Definitely telling stories, lifting up shared values, and modeling learning. We have found, the evidence has shown us that myth busting and emphasizing the humanitarian crisis are not as helpful in a constructive conversation with others with this. So let's learn why this is and what are some things that we can do about having some of these conversations. The first one that we want to do, the first best practice, is that we want to remember that these are people that we're talking about. We want to keep it very humanizing, and we want to reframe things when we're humanizing. So instead of saying asylum seekers, which factually, maybe, I mean, that could be the case, that, factually, but instead of saying asylum seekers, which is kind of abstract and it's out there and it could be a little other, right? We use people escaping violence and families seeing protection, because it just humanizes it that much more. Instead of saying illegal, we use the words irregular status and someone who crossed between ports of entry. And we really want to caution about the term illegal, because the way someone crossed the US border does not necessarily indicate their documented status, okay? So we have a tendency not to use that, and we just invite people to also use your descriptors thoughtfully. Is it really relevant that you're talking about an immigrant or a migrant and qualifying that? And I'll give you a really good example. I was with a friend in the car the other day, and their car had some problems with it, and they were driving me, and they said, oh my gosh, my car is just a mess. And when I'm driving the migrants around, they're just like, oh my gosh, how can we help you with this? And she's like, oh, they're so helpful. But I mean, are they the only people who aren't commenting on her car? And I think a lot of people were commenting on her car, and I didn't understand why she needed to point out that people who were in the process of migration were. So just think about that. What are the qualifiers that we use for anyone, really, but around migration as well? Why are we pointing out the status of someone on their journey? Because I think that we've all had migration very close to us, if not often in our lives. Again, we want to reframe and humanize. And in that reframing, we can replace a dehumanizing message. What we want to not do is reiterate the negative message. So instead of saying, it's not true what people say, that migrants are criminals and drug smugglers, what's the image in your mind right now? Criminals and drug smugglers, right? So it's hard to replace that image. So if someone says that, then responding with, we hear a lot of different messages about people arriving in the US, but I found that all the families I've met are seeking safety and really want to get settled and contribute to their community. Or I met this woman named Sheila or Stella who really blew my mind about the stereotypes of migrants, blew it out of the water. Okay, so why don't we want to reiterate the negative message? Now, I am not a brain surgeon or a neuroplastic surgeon or anything having to do with the brain. I need this really simple, so I hope that you'll be with me on this. But if we think about the brain in two parts, we've got like a downstairs brain and an upstairs brain. And the downstairs brain is kind of like those very basic functions. This is what helps us to breathe when we're not thinking about breathing. It helps our heart to be beating when we're not thinking about our heart to be beating. We blink when we don't need to think about it. And it also is associated with anger and fear, some very, very kind of primal emotions. And these are evolutionary, right? These are evolutionary. Now, what's in the upstairs brain? The upstairs brain is just more complex, and this is like executive decision making. This is where we have planning. This is where we make our decisions. This is where we do self-reflection. And it's also where we access empathy and morality. And if the downstairs brain is super active, there is nothing going upstairs. Okay? So when we're really afraid, have you ever been like so terrified and you just go like, I can't think straight? That's true. We're kind of designed like that. And it happens in conversations. So if we're giving facts, I love to give facts, so this is such an unlearning for me. But if we're giving facts, the facts show, and someone doesn't like to hear it, so they get angry. And then there's just no way to access the upstairs brain. So when we want to have a constructive conversation with someone about something that they might be afraid of, or they might be angry about, we want to calm that downstairs brain. We want to calm it. So what is one of the best practices for calming it is we want to acknowledge the fear or concern. You don't want to dismiss someone's fears or anger. That just makes you angrier or more scared, doesn't it? You want to calm that down by acknowledging it. You know what? I hear you. We all want to make sure our border is handled in a way that keeps everyone safe. I can understand your concern about resources. I know that during the pandemic, I was really worried about my family making it through. I'm with you on that. I hear it. I hear it. That has a tendency to calm down the downstairs brain. And then if you can meet someone in that way, then you can get a little bit more detailed about the process. Did you know that families seeking protection at the US-Mexico border go through fingerprinting, a background check, a DNA swab, and they have to provide contact information for their sponsor before they even receive a court date and they can travel to be with their family? That can calm that down as well. Give just a little bit more detail about that. And then using stories. Storytelling, we recognize, was one of the #1 best practices. Stories, we know, reduce our defensiveness. They can teach very complicated concepts. Here's a little plug from the Franciscans. I mean, Jesus taught in parables, right? Jesus didn't teach in facts. He didn't teach in evidence-based guidelines, nothing like that. He told stories. So many of our spiritual learning, because it's so complicated and complex, are through stories. Stories change individual behaviors and they promote social change. And our friends at Network Lobbyists have done extensive work in this. And this is just a little plug from a book that we have from Kino, and it was written, one of the contributors to it is Sister Maria Gracia Robles, and she was one of the starters. She was one of the foundresses of Kino 15 years ago. And she believes so importantly about just telling people's stories. We can talk about facts, we can do all this stuff. What are the stories that people need to hear? So another way that we calm that downstairs brain is by connecting to shared values. We don't really want to come out from this scarcity language. There's not enough resources. How are we going to take care of everyone? We already have enough poor people. What about the homeless, right? We have these things and we start to get like, ooh, there's not enough. They should have the right to do this, right? It's about rights. When we start talking about that, it gets a little depersonalized, and we want to bring it back to the values that we share. We all want our families to be safe. People who are migrating want the same. We all want our children to be able to walk around and not feel afraid. We all want our children educated, right? People who are migrating want the same. And then another best practice is to normalize learning and reflection. My sister used to always tell me like, you're such a know-it-all. It still irritates her, right? And know-it-alls are kind of irritating, aren't they? But we're all learning in this. No one has an answer for immigration. No one has an answer for a lot of the common problems that we're having in our societies and our communities. But we're all learning. We're learning a lot. When I reflect upon it, I really didn't know that there was such a strict vetting process for people seeking asylum until I got down to Kino and started to learn more about it. I had no idea about it. And when you step back, haven't we all had a migration experience, at least in our own family? Like, I don't live in the place where I was born. Right? So in the real world, every child wants to be able to play, and parents want to be able to give enough to their children. And when I put myself in their shoes, I cannot imagine the resilience and the courage that it takes to move a family thousands of miles away, knowing that they're not going to go back, and to settle in a new place and say, this is the life that we're going to make. I can't imagine that resilience. I mean, to me, it's pretty awesome. And I was surprised to learn. I was surprised to learn how many people are in forced migration. I mean, I'm a privileged migrant. I have always moved for a better job or for school or because I had the capacity to. My parents moved so we could have a place to grow up. I was surprised to learn how many people in the migratory process are being forced to move because they don't have a choice of life in their own places. So we're always learning, always learning. We have a tendency to focus on the crises, but really, in having a constructive conversation, we want to move into hopeful, concrete thinking. If we stay on the obstacle, we don't move anywhere. And some of our language around this, so we can feel overwhelmed, we can feel like we're in a crisis, and we can emphasize the obstacles because those are there. And actually, our brains are hardwired to focus on the negative. That's a way we have evolved, right? It's an evolutionary component in our brains. But if we can shift the conversation to say things like, we're really stretched right here. We've got to get creative. We don't know how to do this, so we have to get creative. It is a challenge, but look at what is happening. You know, in La Crosse, we had over 100 people from all areas coming in to talk about how to have constructive conversations. La Crosse really cares. They're looking for answers. Things are going well. In Tucson, in Casalitas, we have faith communities and the county and and nonprofits that were handling 2,000 to 3,000 migrants a day coming in, trying to help them in their migratory journey. So if we can look for the goodness and name forward movement, then people have a tendency to want to go there. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yes. Are we awake? I don't know. This is siesta time in my life, so I'll try not to keep us here a little bit too much. But some other things, and this is particularly for faith communities. So for communities of faith, where I love talking about justice. I love the word justice. Justice it's a lightning rod, term in immigration. Rights, when we talk about rights, and when we're focusing on numbers and kind of disconnected facts, these are things that are relevant to the conversation, but having them in the initial part of it is not helpful. For those of us who are in faith communities and we're accompanying migrants and we're doing advocacy work for them, we want to talk about solidarity or our social mission. This is what we're mission to in our society. This is how we walk with brothers and sisters. We want to talk about the dignity of the person. Yes, everyone has rights, but they're a person, and we want to talk about shared values with faith and with family that connects us, and then always keeping people as the focus. And for those of us who are from the Judeo-Christian standpoint, Jesus was a migrant and a refugee. His family was forced because of violence to move and then to come back. So this kind of resonates with many of us in our faith communities. And for those of us who don't particularly have a religion or a faith community, it still resonates in the values, right? And I just want to hold up this statement. We really were excited when Dylan Fernandez, the Massachusetts state representative, when the Abbott buses, we call them the Abbott buses, when Governor Abbott started to bus up migrants from Texas into the sanctuary states, this is the statement that his office put out. These immigrants were not met with chaos. They were met with compassion. We are a community, a nation that is stronger because of immigrants. The community coming together with water, food, interpretation help, and resources to support these families represent the best of America. I just got a little bit of a chill, right? These are our American values. These are things that we in the United States hold as dear. We're a nation of immigrants, aren't we? Our island jumped into action by putting together 50 beds, giving everyone a good meal, providing a play area for the children, making sure people have health care and the support they need. We are a community that comes together to support immigrants. Wouldn't that be a great tagline for our community too, right? We're a community that comes together to support immigrants. So I would like to just hold up as a last part of information that I'm giving is that let's be careful about the images we use, because it's true, a picture speaks 1,000 words, right? And the pictures that what are the pictures that you have when you think about migration at the southern border? I mean, we all have images in our mind. These are all people who have crossed through Kino. And they don't really, they kind of stand in contrast maybe to the images that we have of people who are in migration. These, what are these, to me, I could say, these show beauty, they show happiness, they show family, they show some prosperity, they show abundance, they show faith. These are parts of the story that we really don't want to lose touch with, okay? And these are the images that in our media sources that pass the Kino. We just don't post pictures on our social media or in any of our materials that focus on the crisis. We focus on the hope. We focus on ways forward, what's working with migration. Okay? So, let's get our phones out again. And after getting all of this, we got to take, let's just do some surveys. What do you think? These are some, some clips that we've taken from just major media sources, okay? So, the majority of Americans think migrants are invading the U.S. Meanwhile, suffering at the border continues. Let's rate that on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being most dehumanizing and 5 being most humanizing. What would you rate that statement? The majority of Americans think that migrants are invading the U.S. Meanwhile, suffering at the border continues. You can't get on? Even when you do the...
It says there's no active polls at the moment.
What? No active polls? Well, I'm really sorry. Let me try another one. Okay, well, let's just do this. How many think that this is totally dehumanizing? We'll do a 1 through 3. 1 is the most dehumanizing, 3 will be the most humanizing, and 2 will be somewhere in the middle. Who thinks that this is more dehumanizing? More dehumanizing. Okay, we got a good number of people. Who thinks it's humanizing? More humanizing. Okay. Who's kind of in the middle? A little like, yeah, it can go either way. It depends. So there's some conflict in this. Yeah, it's kind of, it can go either way. What do you think is humanizing about this? Let me go back a little bit.
If you assume the suffering includes the immigrants.
So the suffering aspect is a humanizing aspect. The suffering, right? But we don't know, really, because there's no person associated with the suffering, right? The majority of Americans that were invading, clearly invading is one of those words that is not only, it's offensive. It's not only dehumanizing, but it's offensive. Let's go to another one here. Giving a voice back to the voiceless, a call to empower refugees. Is that one working?
Yeah.
That one's working? Okay. Giving a voice back to the voiceless, a call to empower refugees. 1 is most humanizing, 1 is most dehumanizing, 5 is most humanizing. So we saw it, giving a voice back to the voiceless. We're looking at it's rather humanizing. We see it here. Well, we're not so sure. There's going back and forth. Whoa, now it. Yeah. Wow. Well, we're agreeing that it's not super dehumanizing, but we're not quite sure if it's all that humanizing, right? Right? I would say one question I would just have in this is, Do people who are in migration not have voices? That's just the question. I mean, do they not have voices? Are we giving them a voice? Whose voice are we giving them? Right. Are we maybe listening? That could be another question. But giving a voice back to the voiceless, that sets a picture up of a rather disempowered person. And definitely people who are in migration at different stages are facing some huge obstacles, but are they really so powerless, right? I don't think I could make the Darien Gap, quite frankly. Let's do another one. Desperate migrants help prop up the U.S. economy. I went to meet some of them at the border. I actually read this article from the Wisconsin Examiner. It was a really good article. But the tagline, that title, kind of spoke to me. What do we think about this one? Desperate migrants help prop up the U.S. economy. I went to meet some of them at the border. Is this one working? Oh, yep. Yeah, this is we're clearly seeing this as more dehumanizing than we are humanizing. So, good. And this is one that the New York Times did a series of articles, and I just brought this one recently. 5,000 miles, 8 countries, the path to the U.S. through one family's eyes. And that was one of the pictures in the article. That's them at the Darien Gap. 5,000 miles, 8 countries, the path of the U.S. through one family's eyes, the path to the U.S. What do you think about that title? Yeah. We're seeing it much more humanizing in comparison, right? Look at that. Talking about a family, we've got a picture of a family. I'm going to go back to that picture just really quickly because, and if you look up this article on the New York Times, I really encourage you to do it because they actually have like their cell phone footage also of when they were on La Bestia, which is the train that comes up, through Mexico and things. They look like they're at Disneyland, right? But it's the Darien Gap behind them. So it's kind of conflicting in many ways, I would say, but it does humanize that family. They're in New York now. They're in New York. So I have been talking a lot. I do this. My sister just said, "Be sure you're sure you want to give her a mic." So now I've done a lot of talking. What do you think? Do we have any questions, any responses, any additional wisdom in the room that you'd like to share before we kind of transition into our panel speakers? And we've got a couple of mics, I think, that we can run, right? Okay. All right, Luis.
Thank you, Sister Eileen, for your wisdom and this wonderful presentation, for hosting this wonderful event. Can you hear me now? All right, wonderful. Thank you. I'm Luis, and I'm just so I am attending, and I'll be sharing more about voices. But one thing to also just to lift up is the space, the sacred space for us to make mistakes. Because sometimes there is. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I would like to lift up that we all can share a space, a sacred space where we can make some mistakes. I know that sometimes I feel this sense of hypersensitivity, right? What if I make a mistake? What if I say the wrong word? Or what if I say the wrong phrase? And whenever we're speaking about these, issues that are so delicate, I think just feeling comfortable that if we make mistakes, we'll be corrected, and we can go ahead and talk about it, and that's okay. We can move forward with it. That's it.
Thank you. Always learning. Always learning. Anyone else? Going once. Okay. Well then, if we don't don't have any other questions or any other comments, why don't we take a minute to just stand up, maybe get a